Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go! As I explained in my previous post, I didn't have friends when I was younger. This caused me to become very close to my pets, and the only thing I wanted to do was to help them. This sparked my love for veterinary science, and I have been working at my local vet practice every single weekend and holiday since 7th grade. There is one problem though. The only university in South Africa that offers veterinary science is Port, which is where I wanted to study, but they only take the top of the top. As explained in my previous post, a boy named Andy killed my dog Tiki, and I claimed revenge. Tiki's death had an emotional strain on Scruffy, my other dog, and 3 days ago Scruffy died after years of depression that even antidepressants for dogs couldn't help. He stopped fighting and gave up. I was crying my eyes out, but I at least know that he isn't suffering anymore. Scruffy's death has now renewed the hatred I have for Andy, and the past 2 days I was in Pretoria and know where Andy lives from having my two best friends both catfish him and bait him into a Skype call where the link was fake. Grabify is very handy. Through Grabify I gained his ISP, OS, and most importantly, his IP and location. This jerk had to move to Pretoria because the people in a boarding school that rhymes with Hurstney bullied him mercilessly, which I found to be very amusing. But I was in Pretoria because I was invited to the Junior Tucky Top Achievers function, which would show me around the Hatfield campus where I was planning on studying before support. My mom and dad were still at home, but my dad and I went to Pretoria. In a quick little note, he absolutely loved Tiki. In certain parts of South Africa, you can't open Uber services because the taxi ranks, which were run as a mafia, would kill you for taking their clients. The main area where this all goes on is called Taxi City, which is in the middle of the CPD Pretoria, but no one likes to talk about it. My brother used to do heavy drugs like crocodile and tick and such, but for the last 2 years has gotten back on track, gotten a job and a home, and he's now a man I'm proud of. But he still has connections in Pretoria because he lived there. He got one of his friends who he saved from an overdose to help in on our plan, and his name was Ellie Siley. He asked everyone to call him Elvis, and he will suffer but not die. Elvis got 2 of his buddies to do the job. My friends arranged the time with Andy where he should meet them, though he was meeting a 19-year-old Indian girl named Latika at the local Nando's. But as soon as he walked by Taxi City Elvis and then bounced on him, I made sure that I was in sight of Andy so he could see me as Elvis hit his spine and neck with a nice crack from an ebony wood knob carry I personally gave him. We left Andy on the street for that night, and the next day I showed up at Hatfield campus with my uniform on and a broad smile. The police found Andy, but everyone they asked said that a flat cut junkie got him, which satisfied them, and now Andy has a complete spinal injury from the neck down and also has bilateral vocal cord paralysis. Thanks for the help, Elvis. And you too, brother, for inspiring Elvis and his acquaintances. Bailey, Halo, and Snowflake are still healthy and happy. Just a shame that Bailey has to grow up without 2 wonderful friends like Tiki and Scruffy. This is a story of how I completely changed out my community's HOA board and foreclosed on one of their houses after they disrespected me. A few years ago, I bought my first house in a medium-sized 500 to 1,000 homes neighborhood in a southern state. It had an HOA, but I actually picked the neighborhood because they had the lowest HOA dues in the city, the fewest rules, and the house was by far the nicest one I could afford in my budget. After a few weeks, I get a violation notice from the HOA telling me that I had 2 violations needing correction. My lawn was not green enough, and my trash cans were too close to my driveway. I was thoroughly confused about the first one, as it was February, in the middle of winter, so of course my lawn was dead, like pretty much everyone else's. So I had assumed that either this was a mistake or an existing offense from the previous owner. As for the trash cans, I kept them on the side of my house, and I think when the HOA came by, my trash can stuck out past the side wall, maybe around 1 foot. So how dare I? I shrugged them off and continued on. Come March, I got another notice, this time fining me for both violations. Each one cost me $100, and they wanted the money in 2 weeks. I was pissed. This has made no sense, and I was not about to let them just try and get money for nonsense violations. So I called the management company that worked with the board to get them appealed. The lady told me that I needed to appeal directly to the board, and that I could do so in the next annual meeting in a few days. So I of course showed up to the meeting. Prior to it starting, I met with a few homeowners and learned that they were all there for similar nonsense violations, and were pissed off too. I then talked with one of the members of the board about the fine appeals process. He was an older guy in his 70s, with short gray hair and a very worn and angry face. He asked what I was getting fined for, and when I told him, he just looked at me and said, "And you should get fined for that. Young people like you not taking care of their homes is the whole reason I got on this board. Learn to be a better property owner." This dude was a vice president of a volunteer board telling me that I didn't know how to take care of my house. What a sad life. The meeting then started, and the moderator mentioned that since this was an annual meeting, we would be voting on 3 to 5 board members. They had some applicants to the board, and we could also nominate someone today. That's when I had the idea of how I could get my revenge. When the election part of the meeting came, I nominated myself, gave some nonsense speech about HOAs are not here to make money and that I wanted to serve my community, and I won in a landslide. And you could see the board members getting annoyed because they had scowled during my speech. After the meeting, I appealed my violations in a very elegant way, and they agreed to waive my trash can violation. As for the grass one, apparently since I had weeds growing in my yard, like a tiny patch in the corner, they were still fining me because the weeds were turning yellow after I sprayed them. I was dumbfounded how they could get away with this. But they used technicality in the bylaws that I had signed, so I ended up losing $100. The revenge. I will be honest, I had not expected this to work. After joining the board of 5, including myself, I was appointed secretary and had to help maintain meeting notes and review records. They specifically told me that I was not allowed to propose new policies, but I could vote on new ones proposed by the vice president or the president himself, which I later learned was actually a violation of their own rules. I voted every new rule down as long as I was in that position. I decided that my best course of action was to listen to how the others operated and look for an opening to get each of them off the board. The first opening came when the president, who literally looked like the most Karen woman ever, mentioned that she had wanted to fine others for flowers that were not neutral color. Basically, if a homeowner wanted to add something like turquoise flowers, we would fine them. She apparently had a neighbor that had flowers that she didn't like, and she wanted to use the board to stop them. It was pretty insane. I then started my revenge on her. I started the message thread on Slack, since that's how we communicated with the other board members, and I asked them what they had thought about her policy and reasoning. After far too much deliberation, 2 of them honestly thought that this was okay. We agreed that the policy went too far. I then made a long post in the main channel telling her that her actions were not only wrong but that she should be executed from the board. When she inevitably flipped out, I called a board meeting the following week, and the other 4 board members voted her off for targeting a community member for personal gain. She gave a sob story about how the board was her life and that the neighborhood was like her child. But I didn't care. This was one town. I convinced one of my good neighbor friends to join a little later on to take her spot. The next members I targeted were the treasurer and the director, as I wanted to save the vice president for last. They were actually pretty easy to get off the board because they were very easily swayed by public opinion. So I made a fake account on Nextdoor and waited until spring when most of the violations got out. When the letters went out, I looked for angry posts on Nextdoor. I then would comment on each one, giving them the first names of the two board members as the culprits and told them to come to the next HOA meeting to appeal. It worked far better than I had expected. During the next meeting, over 50 people showed up and called out those by name. It was glorious. During the opening session, community members grilled those two for their poor policies, even though they did not make most of them. The VP, now president after the other one resigned, tried to defend them but ultimately failed. The two members were so distraught after the meeting, and I told them that maybe they should resign. And they both did. That was two more down, both of which were replaced by a couple who came to the same meeting and wanted to get rid of these rules. Finally, the board had been flipped to 4 out of 5 people wanting to get rid of all these dumb rules. The president, however, was still same old angry hateful man. He tried to add more rules to increase violation revenue, and we voted him down every time. He started to get annoyed but stayed steadfast to the board. I tried a lot of tactics to get him to leave and not much swayed him. A few months went by and we started with a new management company. They had a much better style of property management and a website for looking through our community records as well as automated reports. When we got our first fines report, I hit pay dirt. The president's house appeared, and he owed around $10,000. Apparently, he had open violations that he had never paid and the other management company hid it from the board for him, since he had been on the board for close to 7 years. So I looked into remedies. Since his fines were over $3,000, our bylaw stated that a majority vote of the board could start an HOA foreclosure on the home, which I still think is insane that HOAs can do that. So I got all the documents together and double-checked with the new management company that the fines were correct, which they confirmed. I called an emergency board session, presented the information, and 4 out of 5 of us voted to start the foreclosure process. The president got angry, cursed, and left the meeting early. We were informed a few days later that the president had resigned, paid his fine, and put his house up for sale. While I'm sad we could enforce a foreclosure, at least he was off the board. I am currently president to this day and have reduced the fining policy to be a maximum of $400, and homeowners can appeal anytime that they wish digitally. In addition, I have banned any grass fines until May, and trash can violations have been super relaxed. The moral of the story: never fine me $200, call me a stupid young kid, and expect to not lose your house. So a while back, my uncle's neighbor died. He was a very nice old man and gave my uncle a lot of land for a cheap price because my uncle sold him some land right by his house to avoid him being landlocked. This was years ago, and due to my uncle selling part of his land and it being close to the house, this man's mobile trailer was pretty close to my uncle's house. The old man's property was shaped like a thin triangle, and he had to have a certain clearance on the sides and front of his property to put up a mobile home. For all these years, there had been no problems between the two, and they even invited him over for Thanksgiving a couple of times when his family wouldn't be able to attend. After he died, his son moved into the trailer, and this is when it started going to go downhill. My uncle has to wake up at 4:15 a.m. to be at work by 5 a.m. Richard, the son, will play music until 12 or 1 a.m. My uncle went over there a couple times to ask him to stop, which he basically replied with, "I moved out of the city to PFE for a reason." This of course frustrated my uncle, which led to the police being called. The issue was resolved for a while, and when it started back up was only a couple of times a week. It was still an annoyance though. About 3 weeks ago, my uncle went to his mailbox and saw he received some mail from Richard. He started to walk to his front door only to see Richard bust open the door and jump the stairs and rush to his car. As he was running, he said, "Late for a job interview, I'll be back in a minute." My uncle returned home and started doing whatever he had planned around the house. Couple hours later, Richard returns and my uncle goes and gives him the mail. Sorry for rushing out, I was late for a job interview which I didn't end up getting anyways. My uncle asked what it was for and Richard said forklift operator. My uncle realized that he had a golden opportunity. He told Richard that the place he worked at was in fact hiring for Lyft drivers and to apply. Richard ended up applying and getting the job, and telling him he started the following Monday. My uncle knew that if he were to get hired, he would be on the morning shift, which starts at 4:30, resulting in him having to wake up around 3:45 at the least. Sunday night, before his first day, my uncle let all the dogs out that night and let them bark all night. He set off his car alarm on accident around 12 a.m. and he borrowed a big speaker from my other uncle and turned it up and watched Saving Private Ryan. Needless to say, the next day when my uncle happened to run into him, he looked like a zombie. My uncle went up to him and said, "Hey, what's up?" Richard responded with, "Just learning my way around here. I don't know how you get up this early every day." My uncle proceeded to say, "Well, it is hard to get a good night's sleep with a lot of noise in the middle of the night." There was not a "oh hell" moment on Richard's face. He held his zombie face and said, "Yeah, true." However, since there has been no loud noise coming from his house after 8 p.m., even on nights we know he does not have to work the next day. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching and see you next time.